And we're back here on the KYCA PM show. Jason Zinzilieta with State Superintendent Tom Horn from the State Superintendent of Schools. I'm not in trouble. My kids are okay. They're already graduated from school, so he's not here for disciplinary reasons. He's just answering questions. So, by the way, questions can be asked 928-541-1016. You're welcome to call and get in line if you have a question for the State Superintendent. So, Tom, thank you for being here today, by the way.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love being on your program.
Well, we love having everybody from the state come up here because we understand that Prescott holds a special place down at the state capitol. Even if it's a small one, we're still special. So
no, Prescott is special to me. And if you ever want to ask me about an issue when I'm in Phoenix, you can call me. I would always be available to you, even on short notice.
Okay, you heard it here, folks. So put down the notes there on that. Okay. Back to the Department of Education from the federal level.
Yeah.
As you said, if we suddenly have an influx of money, we're going to be taking care of teachers. Do you see an advantage to this in terms of perhaps maybe we can shift some money or some personnel from administration back into teaching because of the lesser federal mandate that's going to happen?
Well, it's been a crusade of mine for many years. I was elected to the school board that I mentioned to you, and my first 2 years, I was in the minority of one. So I set new records for 4-1 votes and unseconded motions. And then we elected two of my friends, and so I became the president. And the first thing we did was we eliminated the need to second motions, so I retired the trophy for unseconded motions. But then the next thing we did, we sent half the people in district office back to the classroom. Our percentage of district office for the overall budget was 2.5%, which I think is probably the most efficient in the state. When I got in the legislature, I offered a bill to limit the districts to 5%. If we could do it for 2.5, they could do it for 5. But the small districts that tend to be inefficient, not through any fault of theirs, but just economies of scale, they had too much influence, and I couldn't get it passed, which I think was very unfortunate. We have lots of data that show that if districts that put more money in the classroom and less on administration do better academically, because no school can be better than its teacher, and you've got to pay the teachers well.
Okay. Any other impact you're seeing if this happens next year?
Well, can I tell you some stories about how irrational the federal government is?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I was approached by the Navajos in my first term, and they told me the following. They said, when determining whether a student has to take a test to see if he's an English language learner, they ask 4 questions. This was inherited from the previous administration. And, to me, you only need one question. What's the dominant language of the student? If the dominant language is English, you don't need to test him on as far as being an English language learner. Well, there were 4 questions, and one of them was, does anybody in your household speak a different language? So some Navajo kids who spoke only English, they had no other language, would say, well, my grandmother lives at home, she speaks Navajo. So they would test him, and he would fail the test, not for language, English was his only language, but for academic reasons. So he was put into an English language learner program, and one of them ended up in a class being taught in Spanish. Well, you can imagine how the Navajos felt about that.
Yes.
So I changed it to one language. What's the dominant language of the student? So the federal government came down on me. You're discriminating because you're under identifying English language learners. And I said, you know what? If you want to change what I do, sue me. I know where the courthouse is. I'll meet you there. When I'm not in public office, my profession is as a trial lawyer.
You've done a little bit of law, yes.
I tried a lot of cases. Well, they didn't do it, and then we told teachers that didn't speak correct English, teach something other than to English language learners, and the federal government came down on me again, say, oh, you're discriminating against these poor teachers because of their accent. So I said again, okay, sue me. You want to affect it? Sue me. I'll meet you in the courthouse. They didn't do that either. But my successor compromised with them, which I thought was a big mistake. It was better to stand up to the federal government and offer to fight them. But that illustrates utterly irrational policy. People in my department complain about the fact that they have ridiculous requirements on all the forms we have to fill out. Some of them unnecessary. They say only one person can be on the computer feed for some of this stuff, which is not practical. It's just they're not responsive to anybody, and so they do irrational things. Now, one, I suppose, good thing is that something like 80% of the employees of the Federal Department of Education don't show up to work. They've got a building a block long, and these people are sitting at home. So you talk about inefficient. This is a big problem with the federal government, throughout the federal government, not just education. And they're slow at everything. You know, it took Obama longer to rule on the Keystone Pipeline than for the United States to win World War II. So so they have the slows, and they're not rational, and they don't know what's going on. You know, we asked for some highway funds. This wasn't me, but the state government for I-10, which goes right through the middle of the state, mostly desert, and they were denied because we didn't provide for bicycle paths. So we can do better locally than they can do in Washington.
Okay, so let's say Department of Education disappears,
Yes.
and I'd love to stick on this. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and then honestly, I'll move on to something else.
Yeah.
Do you see the state taking a bigger role in the schools here, or would you rather most of this responsibility filter down to the local level?
Well, we're a local control state.
Okay.
So the school boards are very important. You know, I'm not up for re-election till 2026. So all of my political activity this past year was raising money for conservatives to get on their school boards.
Okay.
Because a lot of school boards in conservative communities have very left-wing school boards, because the teachers union gets left-wing teachers to run not where they work but where they live, and most people don't know who's for what. It's very low profile, and so I think it's important to support conservatives, and we had success in some districts and not in others, but I think that's a very important thing. So we are a local control state, and you're not going to change that culture of Arizona.
Okay.
But I welcome any responsibility I am given, because our philosophy is we don't just sit in judgment of the districts, we help them. I send out solutions teams to help them do better with academics. My mission statement that we adopted after I was elected is that we're a service organization dedicated to raising academic results and empower parents.
Okay. Just a few seconds left before we have to take a break at the bottom of the hour. Quick question. Snap answer.
Yeah.
You running for re-election in 2 years?
I am. I'm already collecting signatures, and I'm already raising money. So anybody who wants to help me can get in touch with me.
There you go. There's your answer, folks. Okay. 928-541-1016. Back after this. And we're back here on the KYCA PM show. Jason Zinzilieta along with State School Superintendent Tom Horn. 928-541-1016. No questions yet, but you're welcome to call in if you do have a question of the State Superintendent. So we got a few other things. Something you mentioned, we're talking about federal craziness and a few other things. With the election of Trump, we've been hearing a lot less about DEI. And I understand at the state level things might be a little bit different than local. How do you see that? How do you address a question like that?
Well, I've been crusading against DEI for as long as the words hit the national, news.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, but in practice, especially in the universities, but also in some schools, it means the opposite. Diversity means stereotyping people according to what race they're in. Mm-hmm. Equity means not fairness, which the word normally means, but it means equal results by race. And inclusion means inclusion only of certain groups, not of everybody. And the way I see it, there's the most interesting philosophical divide in our country now is the one between people who believe in the traditional American value of individual merit and people who want to substitute racial entitlements for individual merit. And when you do that, you don't reward hard work or creativity. If DEI were to prevail, we would become a very mediocre country because you're not rewarding individual effort. So I fight very hard. I'm on the Board of Regents, which governs the universities, and I'm working very hard to fight DEI both there and in the schools.
Okay. All right. Back to schools again very quickly. Obviously, Arizona shows up at the bottom of a lot of lists these days. We've seen that. It's just been a constant, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have the problem of COVID, the aftermath of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to hit on a couple of things here. We hear over and over of, well, you're just throwing money at a problem from different states. I'm not necessarily saying you, I'm just saying in general.
Right.
A lot of people say, well, you just don't throw money at the problem. We spend a lot per student and everything. Mm-hmm. What's the most important thing we need to do to be able to bring standards and grades up and at the education level across the state, in your opinion? What do we need to do?
You heard me talk about my mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing up academics is the center of it. Now, COVID did a lot of damage, and a lot of kids still haven't recovered from it. Yeah. We have a lot of work to do to bring our academics up. But there was a lot of news about a consumer affairs report that said we were the worst state in the country, and that was utter nonsense. Mm-hmm. We were second to last, 50 out of 51, including D.C., in financing, which is not good. We need to solve that, and I talk about that when I talk to the legislature. But we were in the middle of the pack in the gold standard for measuring academic performance. That's the national, NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress. Okay. That's a test that's given across the different states, same test. And to be second to last in finance and in the middle of the pack in academic performance, I think the schools deserve some praise for that. Now we want to do better, obviously. It's my goal to do better. Mm-hmm. But I think the Consumer Reports is good in testing cars and microwaves and so on, but they don't know anything about education.
Okay. And again, I want to go back to COVID very quickly. Mm-hmm. You said we've had a lot of damage. Yes. I think any family could say that.
Yeah.
Do we have any hope of doing a really comprehensive recovery before the preschoolers who were in school in 2020 graduate at about 2034?
Well, I'm working very hard on that. That's the focus. The news media, not including yourself, but generally the news media, like to write about controversies. It makes more interesting reading.
Sure.
So people, think about me in terms of my controversies, and I have plenty of them. Mm-hmm. But 90% of my time and effort and that of our department, it goes into helping our public schools improve their academic performance. So we're doing everything we possibly can. I have 15 separate initiatives, and I'm personally involved in every one of those 15 initiatives.
Are these initiatives that are ongoing? You don't have to get them past the governor. This is something that your office
These
can
are
do.
things I can do. One of them is, I mentioned to you, we send out solutions teams that go out and help the schools. One of them is we do leadership training. We have one of my associate superintendents is absolutely terrific at these at training people in leadership and in classroom management. And he had, as of last year, I think he'd trained 900 school leaders, much more than he had intended to. He was always oversubscribed, and he had to make more and more classes. At the end of each class, he asks whether you would recommend this to your colleagues, and out of 900 people, 100% said yes. And so the word got around how successful this is, and he's almost never in the office. He's out training, which is that makes me happy. So we're helping the schools in that way. We have a tremendous expansion of career technical education. So students who don't go to college get the skills they need to get a good job after high school. We're very serious. We don't want any child fall in the cracks. If you're not going to college, we want to be sure to give you a skill that you can get a good job after high school. So you probably don't want me to go through over all 15.
No, that's okay.
But those illustrates our initiatives that we're working very seriously on helping the schools raise the academics of the students.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break here on KYCA, folks. So 928-541-1016, that is our phone number. If you have a question for State Superintendent Tom Horn, please call in. That'll be fine. We will take calls now. And otherwise, we're going to take a quick break here on KYCA. Back after this. And we're back here on the KYCA PM show, 928-541-1016. Jason Zinzilieta sitting in with State Superintendent Tom Horn. Called you the Secretary of Education. Didn't mean to put on airs there, Tom.
That's okay.
So basically, I'm going through this list, and I just had so many questions for you. But when it comes right down to it, let me ask you this. One thing that I hear quite a bit, of course, as we say, academics are key. But also there seems to be a problem with some parents to say, you know what, they're not learning civics like they used to. Of course, we have the constitutional test to get out of high school, and I think through 8th grade, I believe that was a thing, along with the Arizona Constitution. But what do you think needs to happen for kids to perhaps come out of the schools with a better appreciation for the United States and for Arizona? What has to happen?
I believe the best way to teach physics is to teach history, because with history you're telling narratives, you're telling stories, and that's a lot more interesting than reciting a lot of rules and that kind of thing. So I'm a big advocate of teaching history. I can tell you a personal story about that if you want.
Go right ahead.
Well, my parents were Polish Jewish people in the 1930s living in Warsaw.
Okay.
My dad was not a graduate of college. Not many people were, but in those days. But he loved reading history, and that made him a good interpreter of current events. And so he predicted the Nazis would invade in September of 38. They actually invaded in September 39. So he's a year off, but he got the month right because he knew invasions always occur after the harvest is in. And so he went around telling his family and friends, you need to leave. Well, no one would listen because it's hard to leave your language and your culture and so on. Even my mother didn't want to leave. My older sister was already born in Poland, and so she had a young daughter, and she didn't want to leave. But in those days, husbands had more influence on their wives than they do now. Yep. He made her leave. They couldn't get into the United States legally, so they went to Canada, and then where I was born, and then when I was 4, we came to the country, I became a citizen. I know, and now all my extended family were killed in the Holocaust. So when my chief deputy has a family reunion, she has over 100 people. When I have a family reunion, it's my sister and me. Yeah. So I know that my family survived because of my dad's knowledge of history and ability to interpret current events. And I believe that the survival of the younger generation depends on their knowledge of history and their ability to interpret current events. And I'm talking about factual history, not the nonsense that teaches people that the United States is the worst place that ever lived, but accurate, substantive history with good analysis and good independent thinking, critical thinking. I think that's absolutely critical. And because I know history, I've been reading history every night since I was about 14. Because I know history, I know how the government works.
Right.
So I think that's the best way to teach physics.
Where do we have the biggest problem in Arizona, high school or the colleges, when it comes to history and civics?
It's a tie.
Okay.
Because the job of the college is to train teachers, and they haven't been doing that great of a job. And so one of my jobs on the Board of Regents is to study the training of teachers and make suggestions on that. And you have some left-wing teachers who teach how bad the United States is, and that's ridiculous. Compared to other countries and other eras. We're the best country in the world. We have our problems, but we also have a history of being able to evolve and improve ourselves. And so you need to teach factual history. And there's something called ethnic studies, which I've been fighting. And some of the people on the left say, ethnic studies doesn't exist, and it's cool. It does exist, and it's not cool. And I've been fighting it. I got the ethnic studies program in Tucson to get rid of it. I wrote a bill for the legislature during my first 2 terms, and using that, we got Tucson to get rid of it. But then after I left office, it came back with even more than we had, and so I continued to fight against it.
You said that earlier that we have to have students prepared no matter where they're going, whether
Yes.
they go to college or not.
Or a job.
And I know that we've had a lot of high schools who did away with a lot of the trades back about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That's a lot of the trade programs seem to go away from a lot of the high schools. And I see these days that some of them are starting to make a comeback. But you have to have the will and the money to be able to do it. what is the state helping with that? Do you see that as a very important aspect
Well,
of education? that needs to come
absolutely.
back?
We have a tremendous push on career technical education, which is what they used to call vocational education. Did I mention to you the AEC?
Oh, yes, the school you were at today. Absolutely.
No, this is a different AEC.
Oh, okay, all right.
There
we go.
This is the Arizona Economic Education Council. Okay, we have a lot of great companies in our state, amazingly. But the CEOs complain that there aren't enough skilled workers. So I made a deal with them. I said, okay, I have access to 1 million kids. I'll give you the trained workers. Your part is to let us know what skills are needed so that if the students get those skills, they'll get a good job right after high school. And so we're working very hard to expand these offerings and make sure they teach the skills that will enable the students to get a good job after high school. If they're not going to college, if they're going to college is a different story.
Okay. I'll tell you what, we're going to take our final break here on KYCA, so we're going to wrap things up after this one. So, very quickly, if anybody has a quick call or a question, that's fine, 928-541-1016. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up after this break here on KYCA, after this. And we're back here on the KYCA PM show, 928-541-1016. Short segment here to wrap things up with the state school superintendent, Tom Horn. But I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and bring Ellie in on line one very quickly. Ellie?
Yes.
Afternoon, Ellie.
Thank you. And thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to ask Mr. Horn, what's his title
State
again?
Superintendent Tom is okay.
Okay, Tom Horn. Okay, I really appreciate all the work he's doing, and I know he's got some trouble down there with the governor and everything, but we're praying for him. And I like to have him comment about local news in the paper about our Prescott Unified School District having poor test scores.
Okay. Tom, can you comment on that?
Well, yes, as I mentioned earlier, we're a local control state, and so a lot depends on the school board. I don't know if I mentioned that all my political activity this year, because I'm not up till 2026, has been to help conservatives be elected to the school board. Now, when I say conservatives, the reason is because they tend to be academically oriented, where people on the left tend to be oriented toward racial stuff, which I think doesn't belong in school.
Okay.
So I think the Prescott School Board had a very unfortunate election, and I think it's very important that for the next election, people who care about academics organize and elect academically oriented school board members.
Okay. Thank you, Ellie.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, Ellie. Thanks for calling in. Okay. Very quickly, where did I want to go from here? This was an interesting thing. It was an interesting election year, wasn't it? Do you see a big change coming in the state? We're still a conservative state. And I do realize some people are calling us a little more purple than red these days. And I know in Coconino County and Pima County that's particularly true. But what kind of a change have you seen since the election where you're concerned in the schools? Anything at all, or any sense of a change possibly coming?
Well, I think the big thing is that we increased the Republican majorities in the House and the Senate.
Okay.
And that's important because I had some important education bills that didn't pass because one irrational senator either voted against it or wouldn't put it up for a vote or kept fiddling with details until it was too late. Mm-hmm. With a majority of two, no one senator anymore can essentially veto a bill.
Right.
And so I think that'll put us in a better position to get some good bills passed to increase academics in our state.
Okay. Now, you're running for re-election in 2026.
Yes.
Which means potentially you're in office for another 6 years.
Correct.
And there have been major changes happen even in a span of a year or two. It's not like it used to be.
Right.
And yet we're still running off the old educational model, at least where the government schools are concerned. What do you see having to happen to make sure that government schools remain relevant here in the state in terms of how things are done?
Well, I hear this a lot, that we're still doing things the way we used to. Mm-hmm. But if we could do things the way we used to, we would have a big increase in our academic performance. The problem is a lot of these experiments fail. For example, Bill Gates put a lot of money into dividing up big high schools into smaller high schools. It completely failed. It didn't move the needle one bit. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do is we need to get back to expecting academic performance, expecting good discipline, the kinds of things that worked in the past, and try to get our test scores back at least up to where they were and beyond that.
Do you see any type of experiment in terms of, and what I'm saying is, some people look at it as factory schools. This is a model that was developed over 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And do you see any type of experiment that you have seen, because we do see it in some districts around here, that would succeed, that could succeed if we were able to put more money or more effort into it?
You know, calling it a factory school is a way to be derogatory.
Well, I don't want to be derogatory.
But
it just is.
What we've proved in COVID
mm-hmm.
is there's no substitute for the teacher and the students in the same classroom interacting personally. Mm-hmm. Online learning proved it didn't work because the kids were badly damaged by it. Mm-hmm. And so we need to have kids in school with dedicated teachers, focused on academics, expecting them to do their work, disciplining them when necessary. And that's the best way to get. Let me tell you something. You were talking about 1890, I think, or something.
Right.
During World War I, they tested draftees for World War I.
Okay.
And Northern blacks did better than Southern whites on those tests.
Okay. Why?
Because the Northern schools were what some people refer to as factory schools. They expected results. And I'm about to distribute the 8th grade test for history in 1910, I think it was. And I don't know any adults who could pass that test, much less students.
Wow.
And our DNA isn't any different than it was then. But what they were doing then was they were focusing on what they needed to focus on. They expected the kids to learn. They expected them to do their work. And they had discipline. You know, we have too many administrators now whose attitude is, "Oh, you poor darling, it's not your fault. You come from a bad household," or something like that. If student misbehaves, there needs to be discipline so students learn not to misbehave and pay attention to their work and do their work and focus on academics, and that's the way to improve the performance, not experiments.
All right. And that's going to be your focus for the next 2 to 6 years.
Correct.
Okay. Tom, thank you very much for coming up. Tom Horn, State School Superintendent.
Right.
Very sorry.
No problem.
But you're always welcome here along with everybody else. I'm
Thank
hoping
you.
to get the governor up here one of these days, but we'll see how that happens.
I predict you won't be able to.
I think you're probably right. But we appreciate you coming up to Prescott very much.
Right.
And we're going to take our final break. We're at the end of our show. Don't forget basketball tonight at 7, Prescott High School at Deer Valley. It's going to be a big game. Kelly Cordes himself is going to be calling the game, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Tom, we appreciate it. And, of course, anytime you're in Prescott, come on by.
Okay.
We'll have questions for you.
Well, if you have any questions for me when I'm in Phoenix, just call me, and I'll be happy to do an interview on short notice if necessary.
All right.
I'm always available to you.
All right. Folks, thank you. Have a good evening out there. The news with Marty Myers coming up after the top of the hour. And